All right, so welcome everybody. Welcome to our April Garden Talk. I am Jan Beglinger. I'm the Master Gardener Coordinator here in Genesee County. I am doing the talk today on plant diagnostics. What is wrong with my plant? So that's, a common question we get on Helpline. If you've gardened for any amount of time, you've probably had a sick plant. It happens to everybody. You're walking out in your garden, you're checking things out, and you see it's usually your favorite plant or a plant you spent a lot of money on has spots on its leaves or it's wilting or it's dropping leaves. It just happens. Plants get sick just like we do. So what I want to go through today is just kind of the steps, not necessarily going to be doing a lot of plant disease identification. I want to give you guys the steps of how to do it at your house. And if you can't figure it out, who do you call? You can call the master gardener. So I'll give you that information too. And now it's not going to now it doesn't want to go forward. Okay. Here we go. So not diagnosing plants, your diseases, it's kind of an art. It does take some practice. If it's not something you're used to, it might seem overwhelming or intimidating, but there are like four basic steps. So observation, when you see the plant, you're collecting information on what's wrong with the plant. Once you have that information, you can start doing some deduction and hopefully you can eliminate some culprits out of the formula and come to a conclusion. That sounds really simple, doesn't it? But it can be time consuming. And like I said, it can be a little intimidating. But the good thing is many of our plants, maybe they have one or two diseases or insects that they're really prone to. And if you can learn to recognize that, you can go through the steps rather quickly. And some diseases are very specific to a host plant, so you can rule out other diseases. So this is just kind of your four basic steps: observation, deduction, elimination, and conclusion. The first thing you have to do is identify your plant. We lose tags, we forget what it is. If you're asking master gardeners for help, we need to know what the plant is because we want to know, how does that plant look when it's supposed to be normal? And normal can vary depending on the time of the year. It might look different in spring than it does in the fall. Plants have variegation. Some plants have yellow foliage. Some plants have pubescent or hairy leaves, like this unusual rhododendron. Now, if you weren't familiar with this species, and I can't tell you what it is because it's from a plant collector's garden, um, but rhododendrons that I'm familiar with don't normally have this brown, fuzzy hair like pubescent foliage. So you might think, oh, what's growing on my rhododendron? That doesn't look right. But that's perfectly normal for this plant. And it will wear off eventually because you can see the bottom leaves don't have that. So this is like the first that New Year's growth. So that's perfectly normal. Again, what's normal here? The slide on the left with the white variegated leaves. Well, when you first see that, you might think, is that a virus? What's going on with that? Because the leaves aren't, completely the same variegation. They have different variegations. So that might get you thinking that maybe there's something wrong with the plant. But again, plant collector's garden, he likes unusual plants, and this is perfectly normal for this plant. Now on the right side, we've got a tree with peeling or scaling bark. Lots of times that is a sign that we want to say, uh-oh, we need to take a closer look at this tree because bark doesn't usually peel away like that. Maybe there's insect damage, maybe there's disease. Are there cankers forming? But if we take a closer look at this tree, it is actually a paper bark maple. So this is normal for this tree. And there are some trees and shrubs that do have bark that does peel away like this. And it's actually something that people like in their gardens for winter effect because it's very aesthetic looking. We actually have a Seven Suns tree in our garden that the bark also peels off during the fall and the winter. And it just is something unusual. But you want to know that because if you had inherited this tree, you might think there was something wrong with the paperbark maple. Now here we have a Veronica Speedwell. One is normal and one is not. So the blue colored one, the blue flowers, that is normal. That's what we were expecting to get was blue flowers. The photo on the left, the flowers are very washed out. They're more of a kind of a purplish, but look at all that green on there. These flowers are not supposed to be green. And they're also not supposed to have all these little additional flowerets growing off of it. So this is definitely a plant that if it was in my garden, I'd be getting rid of it. I wouldn't even try to figure out, well, I have an idea of what it is, but I wouldn't be too worried about getting down to what exactly it is. When you start seeing plants like this, where it's systemic, the whole plant is affected like this, you can think about viruses and you can think about phytoplasmas. And those are very tiny, they're kind of bacteria related. What they do is they're basically changing how the plant is flowering. And this can be spread to your other Veronicas in the garden by insects or manually with tools or whatever. So the phytoplasms actually are frequently caused like the yellow asters or the aster yellows or the ash yellows. And you can see the foliage is also rather yellowish rather than a nice dark green. So I suspect that this is one of the phytoplasms. They can also cause witches' brooms and things like that. There is also a very small, tiny flower mite called the Euripidid mite, which can cause the same type of those little flower things coming out of your true flowers. They can do that, and I frequently will see them in cone flowers. They're known for that. If it was a Euripidid mite, you could essentially clip them out and throw those flowers away. But since we're seeing symptoms throughout the whole plant, I would say that this is one of the phytoplasms, and I would just remove this plant from my garden. So that is not normal. So we should do a little defining here. So with plant issues, we can have diseases or we can have a disorder. So a disease is where we have reduced or abnormal growth, and that's caused by an actual plant pathogen, whether it's fungal, viral, bacterial. Plant disorders are abnormal development, and the cause is usually environmental, non-living, abiotic. That can be like unfavorable growing conditions. It can be road salt damage. It can be heat, wind, air pollution, too much water, not enough water. So those things are caused by non-living factors, and that's a plant disorder. And we'll kind of talk about the differences in a slide or two here. So I have this picture up just to give you an example of, is this a disease or a disorder? And if you had gone to work in the morning and all your trees look green and you came home that night and they look like this, that would be a very good indication that it's a disorder because it literally happened at some point during the day. Disease doesn't happen that quickly. If you had gone on vacation for 2 weeks and your trees were green when you left and you came back and they look like this, you might have a little harder time figuring out what had happened, and you'd have to do more deduction and observations. But since I happened to be driving down the road I live on that morning and saw the cause of this, I know exactly what happened. We were actually getting new macadam put on our road, and they had this big old hot looking thing. I called it the dragon because it had flames coming out of the bottom of it. And that's what was putting the macadam down along the road. And you can also see that by the road, the grass is also burned. So there's your clue collecting. You've got trees of different kinds. Everything's burnt by the road, plus the grass is burnt by the road. So that was a disorder that caused those trees to do this. And we want to talk about definitions of symptoms and signs. I get these confused all the time. I don't know why. I just can't keep them straight in my head. But a symptom is a visible change in the growth or appearance of the plant. So in the picture, you can see the raspberry plants are definitely bleached. They're very yellow. A few that still have greenish leaves have very yellow margins. That's a symptom. The sign is when we can actually see part of the pathogen. Usually it's fungal. So we can actually see a toadstool, or we can see some mycelium, or we see spores. Those are the signs. So in this photo, this is like a back hedgerow area. And I suspect what happened was the farm was putting down some herbicide, and either the raspberries, these are wild raspberries, not a big deal, but it was in the hedgerow. Either the raspberries were just leafing out, or the raspberries were susceptible to the herbicide. But to me, that looks like herbicide drift. And the fact that only the raspberries got hit is a kind of an indication of they were super sensitive to that. And they weren't directly sprayed, it was just caused by some drift. So sometimes in your gardens, you will see that if you were putting down maybe a lawn product and it was a warm day or a windy day and the drift goes into your vegetable garden. And newer plants or tender foliage is usually more susceptible to herbicide drift than, say, the grapevine that had been out for a while. All right, so let's just run through some of the differences between diseases and disorders. This will help you as you're doing your own walk around the garden. So diseases, we have we can have sign of a fungal body. So we can have mushrooms or spores, as I said. In diseases, the symptoms develop slowly. So maybe you notice a couple of leaf spots on a shrub, and then 2 weeks later, there's a lot more leaf spots, and they get worse over time. Symptoms of diseases are usually uneven on the plant. You might find some starting on the bottom of the plant, and then maybe it's over on the side. And diseases, symptoms can be on one type of plant in your garden or related plants that are in the same family. Roses and apples are in the same family. So you want to decide, do you have the disease on just one type of plant? If it's on unrelated plants, then you might be leaning towards disorder. Some diseases are very plant specific, and some diseases have multiple hosts. So none of these are like hard and fast rules, but at least it can help you weed out some of what's going on. On the disorder side, we're not going to see any signs of insects or fungal bodies, but you could still be viral or bacterial. Symptoms for disorders develop suddenly over the whole plant. A good example is winter burn, like in boxwood. Your boxwood might look fine all winter, but then we get like a warm spring day and its ground's still frozen, and all of a sudden, like one side of your boxwood is brown. So it couldn't get enough water, it's had winter burn, and it just suddenly the symptoms show up. On disorders, symptoms are consistent on the plant. So usually it's like one side or the whole plant or the top of the plant. And then on disorders, we're also going to see symptoms on a wide variety of unrelated plants. Salt damage, like you might see salt damage along all your plants along the road, and maybe they're all unrelated. And we're going to check for symptoms. I swear, every disease has spots. So everything to me looks like spots. But once you start getting into it, you can differentiate between those spots. They're different sizes, they're different colors, they can be different shapes, they can be on different parts of the plant or the leaf. Some leaf spots stay within the leaf margin, some will follow the veins, some will be actually within the cell structures of the individual leaves, so it'll actually follow the cell walls. You can have discoloration of the leaves, yellow, brown, or black. Leaves can get funny shaped. They can look twisted. They can have swellings. Sometimes a swelling or a bump can also be an insect. Wilting, plants wilt for a wide variety of reasons, but that's a symptom. If you have transplants or house plants, you can always look at the roots. Nice, healthy roots should be a nice bright white. If you've got real brown roots or black roots, then you probably have some kind of disease or rot starting to happen. Plants that drop leaves at the wrong time of the year, that's a good indication something's going on. Branches dying back, especially in trees, are an indication there's something wrong. Stunting of plants and holes in leaves. lots of times if we see holes in leaves, we'll just look for insects. But there are a few diseases. What happens, well, you'll get that leaf spot. And if you didn't notice the leaf spot in the early stages, the center of the leaf will dry out and eventually that dried material will just fall out. And then all of a sudden you've got a hole. So then you might be looking for insects, but maybe it's actually disease. Now, insects usually have uneven, ragged holes. Some of them are very round. So you just, if you see a lot of holes, then you start looking for an insect to rule them out from the diseases. And we're going to check for signs. If you have a hand lens or a magnifying glass, or if you bring it into the office, we can check the leaf under the microscope, and we can actually see the fungal mycelium growing on the leaves. Or, very obvious on the strawberries, you can see the gray mold. That is botrytis on strawberries. So that is a fungal disease. Okay, so we're going to talk about the three, what I call the big three in diseases. Is it fungal, viral, or bacterial? And it so this is not typical looking for zucchini squash, right? Zucchini should not have orange measles or lumps or bumps or whatever. So the gardener brought this in and wanted to know what was wrong with their zucchini. And I believe we determined that it was, in fact, probably viral just because of the way it looked. But fungal diseases, now, plant diseases, around 85% of them are caused by fungal or fungal-like organisms. So I guess that's good for us when we're trying to deduce because the chances of us having a fungal disease in our garden are much higher than having bacterial or viral. And we probably have a few more options in management and treatment for fungal diseases. But let's go through some of those tips for is it fungal? Hopefully, well, usually you'll see a fungal fruiting body. In this case, on the bottom of the leaf, you can see the white powder. That is actually very indicative of tomato late blight. So you might see that early in the morning when you go out and check your tomatoes. Hyphae is a single fungal body that you can see on the leaves. Frequently they're white. If you grow your own seedlings, you may be very familiar with damping off. That is in the soil and your plants, your little poor little transplants, your little seedlings just go bloop and they fall over right at soil level. So that is caused by a fungus. Many leaf spots are fungal. Wilting can be a sign of, again, many things, but fungal too. And a limited root system, or again, your root system looking black or brown can be signs of fungal. So if you find those fungal fruiting bodies and that hyphae or mycelium, that's really a good indication that you have something fungal going on. Viral. Viral plants can be very pretty and very strange. They can have this mosaic leaf pattern. They can have streaking on their leaves. That's like their regular color might be streaked with another color that's not normal. Their leaves can be twisted or crinkled or yellowed. Frequently, the plants are stunted. The flowers, if you have a plant with a virus in it, the flowers can give you some unusual color combinations too. Um, if you have a plant that's supposed to have a pink flower and you're starting to notice white streaks through it, or they're all just flat out green. Green flowers in a plant that's not supposed to have green flowers is usually a good sign that it's viral. Also, many parts of the plant will have discolorations or distortions in the leaves, shoot stems, and flowers. And viruses, we'll talk about this, but there's no cure for viruses. Bacterial, this is the other main group we're going to look at. Excuse me. Bacterial diseases frequently will cause cankers. Frequently in trees, what we look for if we think it might be bacterial are cankers on the trunk or the stems. Now, the canker can be a sunken area, and you may see bacterial ooze coming from that canker where you just have a wetness or a little bit of streaking or dripping or something. A good example of water-soaked lesions is this geranium plant. You can kind of see how that area that's already turning brown is sunken. Sometimes water-soaked lesions will even look kind of gray and they look wet, okay? In bacterial diseases, we frequently will see some kind of yellow halo or yellow edge along where we're seeing leaf spots, or in this case, you can see a very defined yellow area on the outskirts between the normal part of the plant and what's already kind of died back. That can be a good indication that you're looking at something bacterial, but there are also some fungal diseases that will have yellow halos around the spot. But at least you can start to maybe look for other signs or symptoms of bacteria. One thing, bacterial diseases, if it's really gone a little farther than maybe you should have caught it previously, if you're weeding or something and you bring up a handful of smelly, slimy plant material, it really stinks. I mean, bacterial, yeah, plant material is very stinky, it's very slimy. It's that bacterial ooze, and you'll know it. And what you want to do in that case is if you grabbed a glove full of this, you need to sanitize your gloves because that bacterial slime will spread it to other plants just by your gloves. Now, like in our apple trees that are prone to fire blight, that shepherd's crook where the tips of the twigs actually bend to look like a shepherd's crook, or they may look blackened and burned, that is also a sign of bacterial in woody plants. And then bacterial streaming and water from a cut, they frequently will do this in the lab. If they have a plant that they think has bacterial in it, they can put it in a little petri dish of water and cut it. And as you pull it apart, you can actually see the bacteria streaming out of the plant into the water. Not maybe something you're going to see at home, but it is a interesting way to see that you have bacteria. All right, so we've kind of hit the big three. We've talked about symptoms and signs and diseases and disorders. So now in your own garden, what do? You want to start gathering information. It's good to take notes on what you're seeing. I like to take photos. I take photos in my garden through all courses of the season, just so I can always go back and say, oh, what did it look like a couple weeks ago? I don't do it every week, but I try to do it maybe monthly. That way you kind of have a baseline too, or what was changing? Should I have caught this a couple weeks ago? Was it sudden? Did I just not notice it a couple weeks ago? So it's always good to take photos in your garden. You want to look for clues. You want to look at the plants around the plant that is starting to not look healthy. Right plant, right place. We want to make sure our plants are always in the right location. Do they have the right sun, the soil? What's the drainage of the soil like? Are they in a spot that's too wet or too dry? Construction around, especially trees, can damage roots, and you may not notice, or you may have forgotten that you had a water line or something dug in a couple years ago, and it may not affect the trees for several years. And then a drought can also bring on damage that was initially started by potentially the construction. Wind, we talked about a lot of windy weather today, and we've got limbs down and weather abnormalities. I mean, we've had springs where it's 60 for, 2 or 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden it's 10 degrees and the plants don't like that. So, did the leaves all get burned overnight from a frost or a freeze? If you're gone, you might want to ask your neighbors what the heck happened weather-wise. You want to notice or make note of when you first noticed the problem, and is it getting worse over time? Other things to consider: how old is the plant? Some plants just have a certain lifespan. Is it getting to the end of its lifespan and it's just starting to senesce? Blue spruce in our area, we noticed that after maybe 15 to 20 years, they become very prone to needle cast diseases. Sorry. And sometimes it's just age dependent. One thing that we see a lot in trees is that 20 years ago, they were planted too deep. We don't see a root flare at the base. And after time, that just takes a toll on the plant. And then we start seeing issues with the tree 20 years down the road. You also don't want to mulch right up to the tree. So you want to look, do you have mulch too close to the base of the tree? Is it keeping the bark wet? Do we have bark splits from winter weather? Did you get too close to it with the weed whacker or the lawnmower? Lots of times trees and shrubs get damage, physical damage from those two things. We did talk a little bit about herbicides, but fertilizer, if you use too much fertilizer, you can actually burn plants, especially transplants. They're very salty. And again, in the winter, we use salt and de-icer, or we have salt from the road. Those things can all damage plants. We also want to look for signs of insects, the insect itself, insect eggs, cast skins, insect poop. They can all be signs of what's going on with our plant. Obstructions, lots of times this is again back in trees and shrubs. Maybe you bought a larger tree, was balled and burlapped. Did they remove that metal basket or the burlap? A lot of the burlap now is more plasticky. It's not going to break down. If you have arborvitaes, do you wrap them in the winter with twine or burlap or something? Did some of that twine get left on, and is that now growing into the bark of the plant? Because that can cause damage too. And these are all things that maybe we have to do a little investigating and look at the plant a little bit closer to see what's going on. But that's also all good information that if you can't figure out what's going on with it, we would need for the Master Gardener office. When you're trying to figure out, when you're doing your research, one of the places you want to start is what diseases are common to your plant. Here I have an example of hosta of diseases and pests from North Carolina State Extension. If you're looking at your hostas, you can find an article like this and just start going through it and see if anything matches up. It can be very overwhelming just to try to do research because there are so many diseases. But many plants have several diseases that are very common in that plant family. And it also can be seasonal. We see a lot of apple scab after a cool, wet spring because apple scab is very common in our area in apples that aren't resistant to it. So you want to take into account the seasonality and your plant. So I just wanted to give this as an example of what's going on and how do you go about trying to figure it out. This was a flower garden, cutting garden, and you can see down through the middle, these poor plants are just not thriving. At the top, there's a lot of empty holes where the transplants just didn't take. This was a planting of Lisianthus. And you can also see that the flowers on either side of this planting are, for the most part, doing okay. There's a plot farther down that isn't doing well. So I got the questions like, what is going on with my plants? And then in the close-up of the Lisianthus, you can see they're not really nice dark green. And they also have all these little yellow spots on them. This was not something I was familiar with. So what did I do? I just Googled diseases in Lisianthus. And the first thing that comes up, Fusarium is the most common soil-borne disease of Lisianthus. And that's what it ended up being. So just by Googling diseases of Lisianthus, I came up with the most common one, and that was actually it. So I was lucky. I didn't have to do too much research on that, but at least I was able to give the grower an answer for her. Resources that you can use at Cornell with the Master Gardeners, we always like to use research-based knowledge. So that's our land-grant universities, whether it's Cornell or Ohio or Penn State. We do have a bookcase full of textbooks and field guides like this disease of trees and shrubs or the abiotic disorders of landscape plants. So the Master Gardeners have access to those. We do a lot of our research online now, of course, but we like to use .edu sites, which are our land-grant universities. We do use .gov sites and .org. I've got a question mark next to them. Some are perfectly fine, especially if you're looking at like the Daylily Society or the Rose Society, an organization that has a lot of research-based information on their websites. We generally stay away from blogs or commercial sites just because we don't know what sources of information where they're getting their information from. So we really try to stick to the land-grant universities and the gov sites or use our textbooks and field guides. Oh, and I did want to mention the Ohio line. Your handout for the day came from that plant pathology introduction to plant disease series. So I think there's a 8 or 9 in that series, and they were very good for the home gardener. So I just wanted to make a note of that. If you're online and searching, or you want more information once we finish today and you want to kind of do a refresh, they have a couple of good articles on plants get sick and how the one I gave you, which Gordon still has, so that's fine. All right, so you've gone through all of your tools in your toolbox and you're stumped. So I'm gonna say, come to the Master Gardeners. We will help you. We do like for diseases. Photos can help us, but we really do like samples because we want to look at it under the microscope. And I'm sure my disease person in the back will agree that, we really want to sample so that we can tell you whether it's bacterial, fungal, or viral. And we cannot do anything with a dead sample. Dead is dead. I can't tell you anything about a dead plant, usually. One reason is because once the plant dies, a lot of fungus, yeah, a lot of fungus starts moving in to actually break down the dead plant. So they can actually be covering what was originally wrong with your plant. So we would like a representative sample. We want to see part of the plant that was normal. And then we want to see the area where the disease has started, but it's not, it's just kind of, we call that the edge. It's between the normal and the fully involved. So if you can bring us a branch of that has that whole thing going on, that's the perfect sample. Um, I know you can't bring in roots if we're talking about a tree, but if you got a transplant or a house plant, we can look at the whole plant. This poor picture here was a tomato plant that wasn't doing well, so he was able to bring us a whole plant from his garden. And then that gives us a chance to look at the roots and see if there's something going on with the roots or if the problem is soil borne. We do need usually more than one leaf for identification purposes of the plant if you're not sure what it is, but also just to get a better look. If we have one leaf with one leaf spot, we might be able to help you, but we also want to take a look at a bigger sample so we can also look for insects and also see what's going on with different parts of the plant. We like to look at the leaf, the stem, and then any branches that might be with it. Samples need to be fresh. Please don't leave it in your car for 3 days and then bring it to us. Fresh is better. And we do like those photos. You can email us photos. We want a photo of close-up of the problem. And then we like you to take a couple steps back. And then of the plant, we like a picture of the whole plant. And then we really also would like a picture of kind of the plant in its setting in the garden so we can look for those other clues or see what else is going on with the garden. And I know not everybody has a microscope. We have microscopes here, but if you're at home, you can use a hand lens. You can use a magnifying glass. You can even use your phone on camera because a lot of phones you can actually do magnification on it. And then you can take photos of those and also bring those into us. The reason we like to check under the microscope, this was a good example. This was a maple tree. It was a dry summer. It was on a bit of a dry knoll, and it just wasn't leafing out as fully as it had the year or so before, maybe past years. And the leaves had this yellowish, spotty stuff going on with it. So we're like, is it nutrient? Is it because of the weather? We weren't quite sure what was going on. It didn't have too much. I don't think it had any dieback on this one. But as soon as we looked at it under the microscope, on the veins, we could see these fungal bodies. And we were able to come up with that this was a chronic case of verticillium wilt. And we would never have figured that out if we hadn't looked at the leaf under the microscope. So it really didn't have any other symptoms of verticillium wilt, but the leaves gave us the diagnosis. So that's why we like samples, so we can look at stuff under the microscope. So now that you've reached your final diagnosis, we want to talk about, is it going to be a problem, or did it turn out that it was a normal plant? Is it going to affect the plant of the health? Is it affecting the plant health now, or will it in the future? Is it affecting aesthetics of the garden? Do you just not like the way it looks now because it's lopsided or whatever? We do try to tell folks what can reasonably be done with your plant problem. You, the gardener, will have to decide on a course of action after you have all your facts. If it's a tree and you have a fungal disease, is it something that you can spray yourself? Are you going to have to hire an arborist? Is it something that's going to have to be sprayed every year? Is this something you want to deal with? Is it something you can afford? Perennials, is it something that you can treat and walk away from? Are you going to have to do multiple treatments this year? Um, do you have the time to deal with this plant? Like these beautiful phlox that get powdery mildew every year? Do you just want to rip them out and replace it with something that doesn't get powdery mildew, or look for a phlox variety that is resistant to powdery mildew? Is the powdery mildew, is the phlox actually sited in the right location? Does it need more sun? Does it need dividing? So these are all things that are going into our final diagnosis and our recommendation to you. And there we have in bright yellow. There's not always a fix. Some things we're just like, your best course of action would be to take that plant out of the garden. It's either going to be a major problem in the future years, or there's just nothing you can do with it, and it's just going to pass its disease to every other plant in your garden. So just FYI, not always a fix. Sometimes the best answer is take the plant out. All right. And I didn't want to leave you hanging. I wanted to give you a few management techniques. These are very broad. If you come into the office, we would give you more specific for your diagnosis. But for fungal diseases, there are cultural and chemical weapons that you can use. The best thing is if you can look for resistant varieties, especially in vegetable gardens. This goes across the board for all the diseases. Always clean your tools and materials after you've worked on a plant, especially a plant that you suspect may have some kind of disease. Sanitize your plants, clean your gloves, change your gloves, put on new gloves, wash your gloves. And we always want to avoid wounds and stress to plants. Healthy plants or happy plants are less likely to become infected with a disease or attacked by bugs. When we're watering, we want to put water on the ground, on the roots. We don't want to wave the wand around and get all the leaves wet. Leaf wetness leads to fungal diseases. In the majority of fungicides, if you're going to go the chemical control, most fungicides are labeled as a protectorant, not a curative. So what that means is you have to apply the fungicide prior to the disease infecting your plant. So with late blight on tomatoes, you have to apply the fungicide on your tomatoes before the late blight shows up in your garden. Otherwise, once you get the late blight, it's not curative. You can't cure it. Now, in the last couple of years, this biofungicide Revitalize has come out, and that actually has some curative properties for some diseases. So it's also good for bacterial diseases, and we did not have a lot of products for home gardeners that were good for bacterial diseases. So I'm no endorsement is implied, but it is a good tool in your toolbox. And you do want to read the label whenever you use a chemical fungicide, bactericide, whatever. So you want to read the label, make sure the plant that you're treating is on the label, as well as the disease, and then follow the directions for the application. Bacterial diseases, again, cultural and chemical. Now, bacterial diseases are frequently spread by insects. So if you know what insect, like leafhoppers and aphids are usually the biggest culprits, you may have to do some insect control to bring bacteria diseases under control in your garden. There might be some resistant varieties, not for everything. Again, cleaning your tools, good sanitation, avoiding wounds and stress. So the emphasis on keeping bacteria diseases out of your garden is to prevent the spread of them. And there are some products, a lot of the copper products are labeled for bacterial diseases. Again, the Revitalize is labeled for some bacterial diseases. And then virus management, it's purely preventative. There is no cure. And again, it's insects like the aphids and the leafhoppers that spread viruses. Weeds are also a source of viruses. They can actually be how the virus overwinters in your garden and perennial weeds. So in the spring, as the weeds are coming up, the leafhopper, the aphids are feeding on that weed, and then they go into your garden and they're spreading the virus that way. So the best thing you can do is to remove any infected plants. I don't know how many resistant varieties to viruses there are. There might be some. Again, using like a 10% bleach solution to clean your tools. You want to avoid wounds because insects may come to the wounds. And then closely inspect plant material before buying. And I'm going to go into this a little bit more in a minute. So review, location, location, location. Site your plant in the right place. Right plant, right place. Plants that are in the correct place are going to be healthier. They're going to be less likely to be stressed and less likely to get some of these diseases. And they can actually, it will help them resist some of the diseases if they are in the area. Whenever available, especially in the vegetable gardens, use resistant varieties. If you are having a problem with downy mildew on cucumbers, look for resistant seeds and resistant varieties. You want to do eradication of insects and weeds that could be possibly spreading these diseases. You definitely want to have good equipment sanitation whenever you're in the garden. Like 10% bleach solution, you can have that made up and wipe your equipment down with. We always want to avoid plant injury when possible because whenever we injure the plant, that gives an opening to a fungal spore, an insect to get into the plant. And don't bring home sick plants. I like to, when I'm at the nursery buying plants, regardless of tree, shrub, vegetable, I look them over very carefully, check the undersides of leaves. If they're small enough, you can pop out the plant from the pot, check the roots. You want to look at the whole tray of plants that you're looking at. Do any of them have leaf spots? Are there any little white flies coming out of them? For most cases, the plants are being treated with something in the nursery, maybe, maybe not. So if they have been treated with insecticide or disease or something, once you bring them home and they're no longer being treated, they may actually show signs on. So what I like to do now is I don't pop stuff right into the garden when I bring stuff home. I actually quarantine them for a week or two and keep an eye on them, keep them watered, keep them happy. And then if they start looking sick, they either, if the nursery is close enough, I can take them back, or they just don't go in the garden. I'm not I'm done with planting sick plants and trying to nurse them back to health. That doesn't help anything, and you're just introducing. And we're also finding too, more soil-borne things from nurseries are a possibility. So I also try to take off as much potting soil if I can before I plant it, just to help reduce that possibility. So Sue, my master gardener who loves diseases, her tagline here is successful treatment depends upon a prompt and accurate diagnosis. And I have learned a lot from her on diseases, and we appreciate her on the helpline. So again, if you're not sure, ask a master gardener. I have master gardeners here Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to noon. You can call us, email us, pop into the office. You can find us on our Cornell Cooperative website. We do have a YouTube page. All of our garden talks have been recorded, and you can find a link on our website to our YouTube page. A couple of upcoming programs. May 1st, we're doing Create Container Gardens, and June 5th, we're doing some tips on preserving. And for those of you interested, our Spring Garden Gala will be May 17th, 10 to 1 right here. All right.